The Burning Crusade is the original Classic Plus. That's right, everything from the Caverns of Time to Mount Hyjal to Karazhan Tower to even Hellfire Peninsula itself. On top of that, even level 70 was an original vanilla concept. Vanilla WoW was designed to go to level 70, but that was scrapped and left at a level cap of 60 instead. Now, TBC took a lot of things from vanilla World of Warcraft. It's essentially the original Classic Plus, a continuation of the vanilla world, but updated, expanded upon, improved, and made better for more and more people. Now, for the most part, the original idea behind Outland and Hellfire Peninsula versus the TBC Outland and Hellfire Peninsula are two completely different things. Through and through, the original Outland is nowhere near as massive or all-encompassing as the Outland we got on TBC. In fact, Hellfire Peninsula was not a peninsula, it was a giant floating piece of shit. It was a giant floating rock hovering through the deepness of space for lore reasons. Because the original Outland was more akin to a turbocharged Warcraft 3 Outland than anything else we knew. Hellfire Peninsula was designed for vanilla's World of Warcraft, but like a lot of other concepts, it got scrapped due to time constraints, raid constraints, budget constraints, just manpower in general. Nobody really knew how popular World of Warcraft was going to be. They knew it was going to be popular, but to the scale it got, nobody could have predicted that. So they needed to get the game out the door at 2004, and they couldn't spend more time developing newer zones and areas. For the most part, original Hellfire Peninsula was meant to be one zone of vanilla. It wasn't a whole continent, it wasn't an expansion. It's more akin to Karazhan in the scale of content available to it. It wasn't meant to take you away from Azeroth forever, but for a phase. Just like we went down to AQ, we went down to Silithus, we had a good time, we did the Karazhan war effort, we did all that juicy stuff. Original Outland and Hellfire Peninsula was essentially that. If they had done a phase instead of going to TBC initially, imagine after Naxx, it was the Outland phase. It would have been something akin to a raid, maybe a dungeon or two, some new quest lines, a new open world event of some sort. Just, continuing the game world a bit and letting you keep progressing and playing. But they chose to go TBC instead, and that led to the original Classic Plus that we got. Because that's what TBC was for all intents and purposes, an expansion upon vanilla. The first expansion, changing and improving the game to make it more accessible and fun and enjoyable. Now, a lot of people love vanilla's world through and through, but TBC did do a lot of things right, but it also changed a lot of things and took away from the vanilla experience by virtue of taking us away from vanilla. We moved to Outland, but in Classic Plus, that would be different. And that's the difference between Classic Plus of the modern day and Classic Plus back in the day. The original Classic Plus is just an expansion. They're doing more in World of Warcraft. Nobody realized that World of Warcraft would eventually get all the way to Midnight coming out very early next year. 20 plus years of World of Warcraft. If you had told somebody back in 2004 they were going to be playing World of Warcraft for 20 years, they would have laughed at your face and said, no shot. And then guess what? 20 years later, here we are. Considering that Classic Plus is an eventuality at this point, we know for a fact they're working on new things after Season Discovery, after Classic in general. We don't know that it's going to be called Classic Plus. It's probably going to be called Azeroth Reborn, Azeroth Adventures Untold, some stuff like that. But we are getting something afterwards, but we're going to have to wait till BlizzCon next year, because that's the earliest time frame we're looking at getting a brand new expansion upon Classic. And what would Classic Plus even look like? Considering that TBC really did complete, and I'm using complete here loosely, the vanilla world's original storylines and arcs. Now, I don't want to talk about Hellfire Peninsula too much because that is one of the more outlandish what-if scenarios in this context. It was part of original vanilla plans, but no matter how they do it, it's not really classic in this context because it would be taking too much from the TBC concept that they made. Original Outland is no longer a real thing. I don't even know if they could find the original notes for original Outland. What would that even look like? Now, realistically, they could just port Hellfire Peninsula from TBC into the vanilla world, block off the rest of the continent, and just have Hellfire Peninsula be its own thing, self-segregated zone, quests, dungeons, raid if you want, and move on from there. But honestly, if they are going to use Hellfire Peninsula, that should be one of the last things they come back to alongside the Emerald Dream. they should not really be using Hellfire Peninsula until the very end of after finishing all the other Classic plus vanilla storylines and content. But if you do wanna make a Dark Portal event, introduce Blood Elves, maybe Draenei, some new races, you don't have to do those, you could do High Elves and Goblins, but introduce some new races. You can still use the portal opening, but I don't necessarily think we should go through it in the first couple of years of Classic Plus, but that's just my opinion. So we're gonna move on to an actually much more popular, well-known vanilla thing that was very much so even more popular in TBC, and that is Karazhan Tower. TBC Karazhan is a massive far cry from original Karazhan. In fact, they're two completely different things. The TBC Karazhan is a 10-man raid, small, fine-tuned, beautiful, well thought out and designed. OG Karazhan is absolutely ginormous. In fact, it's probably one of the biggest structures ever made. Imagine if Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, and Blackrock Mountain was one raid. That's original Karazhan. It is ginormous. It has two locations. You have Upper Karazhan and then Lower Karazhan, and they're both just huge. They would have to put 20 plus bosses into this raid to make it be filled and fleshed out. In fact, the only other option is to put an obscene amount of trash in here that makes it a completely unfun raid to do. And it's for that reason that Karazhan Tower was shrunk down. They made it much smaller. They compressed that stuff down into like one little 10-man raid. But in a Classic Plus that finishes vanilla storylines and arcs, they should finish off Karazhan, both upper and lower. They already did Karazhan, Crypts, and Season of Discovery. It was very well received, people loved it, but they should do more. We should have a 40-man raid, or flex raiding, I'm not sure what they're going to do for Classic Plus, and a 20-man raid. The ZG and the Blackwing Lair, the AQ40 and the AQ20. They should fully utilize Karazhan for what it's meant to be. A ginormous giga structure full of the secrets of Azeroth, because Medivh and the Guardian, there's so much lore and storyline that the people don't even realize the secrets being buried deep within Medivh's tower. And it's a mostly finished location. They just need to retexture it, add some doodads, add some gimmicks, design new bosses, actually flesh it out. So many things could be done here to expand upon the vanilla world. You could literally make 3 whole phases out of Karazhan and still not run out of content. That place is obscene. Literally at the very end of it, there are portals to other dimensions. You could what if scenarios outland in the past, a whole different world, a demon planet, whatever you want. Karazhan is expansive beyond measure. It just isn't being utilized to its full potential. Heck, they can still even use TBC's Karazhan as an alternate timeline Karazhan what if. That's how much Karazhan can be utilized in Classic Plus. But Karazhan for the most part is a place people love and adore. It's a lot of people's favorite experience. It's really fun, it's really alt-friendly, and people just adore it. And the fact that one of TBC's most adored locations is an original vanilla concept that was expanded and finished, well, not expanded, shrunk and finished in TBC, says a lot about vanilla WoW's potential. And here we're gonna move on to Caverns of Time, because that's right, that's another location that was finished within vanilla, but once again pushed back and not really utilized until TBC. Now, we don't really know the full extent of Caverns of Time within vanilla's world. That's right, the original Caverns of Time, whilst designed and done, is a mystery. The only thing we know for a fact that was fully finished was the Black Morass. And that's right, it was bigger and way more in-depth. In fact, this place was so big they literally cut off half the dungeon and you just teleported to the top half of the Black Morass and then have to deal with the first half of it. Because vanilla, for some reason, made everything as huge as humanly possible, which is cool, I appreciate it, but that's just something to keep in mind. In fact, in the original Black Morass, you had to walk into the portal, make a huge trek across a mysterious alternate dimension location because, you know, you're going through time, so time shenanigans, timey-wimey stuff. And you climb up this hill, going all the way around multiple times until you get to the top to Black Morass. And I think for the most part, you would be meant to be fighting the infinite dragonflight here, fighting the dragons trying to stop you from stopping them from changing history. And this would have been the same, just imagine in Black Morass, but twice as long and kind of twice as shitty in this context because it's not, honestly, I don't know anybody that likes Black Morass. The lore and the story is pretty cool, but the dungeon is terrible. So I understand why they cut half of this for TBC, But hey, we're talking about unfinished content and what it would have looked like, and not every piece of unfinished content was necessarily great content, and the Black Morass is a showcase of that. But that brings up all the other locations and things that they've done in the Caverns of Time. From old Hillsbrad foothills to the Battle of Mount Hyjal, there is so much content there inside the Caverns of Time that utilizes vanilla locations and ideas. Even the Battle for Mount Hyjal is a continuation of the Hyjal location, just a top half, slightly retextured, slightly changed up, and made into a raid instead of a full-blown zone. Now I'm going to cover Mount Hyjal more later in the video, and I'm not going to talk about it too much right here, but the fact that the Caverns of Time gives you the opportunity to revisit and go to so many locations and arcs and like timelines, both in the past, in the future, and what if scenarios, it really does show you what the world of vanilla is capable of. We could go back to the Null Wars when Stormwind was a fledgling kingdom expanding. Colonialism, fuck yeah. All the way to the Troll Wars between the Amani Empire versus the Arathi Empire and the High Elves all together fighting. That's just the tip of the iceberg. What about the Siege of Stormwind? People don't really think about that too much. When the old Horde, or I guess the true Horde, invaded Azeroth at the behest of Sargeras and Gul'dan and Medivh's, trickery and all those wars. What about the Alliance of Lordaeron pushing the Horde out of Azeroth? Concentration camps. I'm not sure why I mentioned that, but it is what it is. There are so many storylines that could be visited to make content out of. Imagine Alwyn Forest turned into a raid. The Horde pushing through Alwyn Forest, sieging Stormwind, and then you have to fight them off. There are dozens of stories to tell. You can effectively make infinite content within the Caverns of Time. There is no limit to what you're capable of doing because the world of Azeroth is so interesting, the characters, the stories. People would love to see these things. What if you had Arthas' Siege of Northrend? Imagine him destroying the boat and having a whole dungeon of that. Imagine him climbing the citadel of the Frozen Throne to fight Illidan up there. There are so many storylines that could be done, and people would love all of them. But that's enough of the Caverns of Time, because as much as I would love to have that, that's gonna be a thing that takes a lot more energy and art assets to do, unless they just reuse existing assets to just do things. But the Caverns of Time is amazing, which brings us on to Hyjal. And now, the Hyjal we have in vanilla, and the Hyjal we got in TBC, and then the Hyjal we got in Cataclysm onwards are all different. Original Hyjal had the ginormous skeleton of Archimonde in there. When he tried to harvest the World Tree and then Malfurion called upon the Wisps, a billion Wisps exploded and Malfurion watched Archimonde detonate and annihilate everything. Now, in the context of TBC, it was turned into a raid, they changed things around, and it was the battle for Mount Hyjal, essentially watching Archimonde reach the end, and then Malfurion activating the horn, making the Wisp blow up, and seeing the finale of the Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos campaign. But in Classic Plus, in my personal opinion, and again, this is my opinion, it should not be based off TBC. It should be based off of the vanilla intentions, the original world of Azeroth, and expanding upon that. There should be a raid, the Barrow Dens, things of that nature. Just because TBC did one thing as the original Classic Plus should be based off more on the original ideas and not the expanded upon or finished version for the retail team's design philosophy that they went with. Yes, that was the original team that made vanilla, but it's no longer the same team. So the storyline should be based more on what was left in the note for vanilla. It should be a new zone, a new raid, new dungeons, quest lines, NPCs, mobs. It should be something akin to AQ40 and Silithus, a full-blown, huge global zone, opening Hyjal, dealing with the demonic threats there, helping the corrupted Furbolgs, dealing with the remnants of the Alliance or the Horde left over there, the demonic remnants, everything that could have been and should be dealt with. Hyjal is an expansive, amazing location, and I want to know the lore of Hyjal before Cataclysm, and not the TBC version of just being a raid for the whole zone. Now, I can't speak to exactly how they should do Hyjal because everyone's opinion is different. You ask 10 people what Hyjal should look like in Classic Plus, you're going to get 10 different answers. But everybody agrees on the baselines. A raid, a zone, some dungeons, and quest lines. Everything aside from that is completely up in the air, but in my opinion, it just needs to be more classic. And that's very vague, I'm not going to lie, but that's what vanilla is. It's just the expansion upon the world. There is no right or wrong way to do this. I know there's going to be people in the comments saying this private server did this private server did that. The dev should look at all sorts of inspiration for what classic Hyjal should look like in this context. But it needs to be classic plus Hyjal. And that's a tall order to really achieve here. And this is just what TBC has taken. I'm not even talking about class tuning, new races, new classes, things of that nature. Death Knights were meant to be in the original vanilla, but that got scrapped. Paladins were meant to corrupt themselves and become Death Knights. That's not even talking about Rune Carvers who ended up becoming the new Death Knights in Wrath of the Lich King. That's not talking about other classes and race designs, all the old scrap dungeons. Because there was meant to be like 60 dungeons. So many open world locations that were meant to be dungeons that were left as open world little areas, high level quests. There are so many things in the vanilla ethos and world that could be made and perfected in Classic Plus that I'm not even going to discuss in this video. But let me know in the comments down below what you really think. What do you think they should take from TBC and reutilize in Classic's world? Or do you think that everything that TBC did is completely anti-ethical to the Classic world and they should not really bring any of that over? Because in my opinion, I don't really want them to copy TBC, but I want them to use what TBC used, but do it in the vanilla way. So thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. If you hated it, understandable. Dislike and subscribe so you can hate my next video too. And then come follow me over on Twitch so you can hate me live. I rant about Classic Plus and Classic 4 days a week. Thank you all for watching. Ebonheart out. Peace.